This is Fam Electric Ghost, and we're live on the air with Thomas Harris. You're an author and a thought leader. So I want to talk to you today about those things. But I want to welcome you to the podcast. How you doing today?
I'm great, and I really appreciate you having me here. I'm really excited.
Well, it's fun to talk to people. We've been talking to people since 2016. We're at episode like 1133 with this episode.
Wow, that's
and
great.
we do
Awesome.
have your link there. That will be fully clickable. Exceptionalskills.com, exceptional leadership. You'll have to remember that. You'll be able to click through. And we always start the podcast asking a couple questions before you get into your story. Like, what motivates you and why do you do what you do?
That's a good question. I guess what motivates me, part of it's my faith. I'm a Christian. My faith motivates me and pushes me forward. And also, like when it comes to what I'm doing now, in the sense of leadership, a big part of that is I just see there's such a need for it, and that's part of really what motivates me and is why I do what I do. I've realized the more I've learned about leadership, the more I realized I didn't know about it beforehand, and
Hmm.
that's kind of really driven me to help other people become great leaders.
Yeah, leadership is something you have to build, go into. And some people don't feel they have the ability to become a leader in life, but sometimes it can be brought upon you by different circumstance. So maybe you can tell your story of like why did you want to go into particular area, because some people don't feel confident to be a leader. So I was
Right.
wondering like what made you feel that you wanted to be in that space.
Well, it kind of starts back. I think first I say, hopefully by the end of this, anybody who feels like they can't be a leader will know they can be. And probably everybody is a leader in ways that they don't realize they are. Um, but I guess my first foray in understanding or misunderstanding leadership was when I was a kid. And I remember we'd go to my cousin's house. And while we were there, there's a group of us, and we would be left, the adult would step outside of the house, and one of us kids would be left as in charge. And I remember I wasn't the oldest, but I wanted to be the one in charge. Like I
Mm.
wanted to be the one in charge because if I was in charge, then I could be the boss and tell everyone what to do. That's what I thought that was. And I remember that fateful day when I was the one put in charge. I was like, they left and said, Thomas, you're the one in charge. You're the one, you know, you know, making sure the kids are okay. And I remember that moment when I told the kid to do something or not do something, and they didn't do it. And I was like, wait a minute, I'm the one in charge. And so I quickly realized I say I realized I didn't quite get it yet, but I realized then in a way that just being the one in charge doesn't mean people are going to do what you say you're going to do.
Mhm.
And kind of throughout my life and throughout high school, college, and beyond, I had different leadership positions, informal, formal. And I thought, just like everybody else, I thought I understood leadership and I thought I was doing a good job. But I still, looking back, I didn't. Like, I remember I thought it was like a volunteer lead position. And I was like, man, if I had a formal position and they were told I was the boss, then I would be the one, then they would do what I say, that kind of mentality. Or if I had a position and that was a formal position, then I would be a leader. And
Mhm.
obviously that's wrong. And I
Yeah.
remember I was doing my blog. I had a blog that had different soft skills and things of that nature. And I was like, well, let me do leadership because it's a good topic. But the more I really dived into it, the more I realized I was so clueless about leadership beforehand. And then I really just found that. And then I also realized that much of the content out there about leadership, especially like on social media and blogs and stuff, a lot of it's wrong. And
Mhm.
so I just deep dived in it. And I realized how important leadership is and how much it's lacking. And so that's why it kind of became my focus is I just really wanted to help. Because if people became better leaders, then we'd have a better world. Everything would change with great leadership.
Yeah, because a lot of times people feel like, well, if I'm tagged the leader, then everybody's gonna recognize that I'm a leader. But you have to have like people have to acknowledge you as the leader,
Hmm.
and they have to respect you, right? And
Right.
so if you can't get folks to actually acknowledge that you're in that role. If they don't believe that you are, right? Because maybe you deep down, maybe you don't believe you are. And I think
Yeah.
sometimes people radiate like vibrations or frequencies, and people can kind of pick up on the fact that you have a lot of doubt, or they pick up that you don't have the right energy in the room. And so
Right.
if you're kind of trying to project, and well, you're not projecting the right feeling, and it's kind of revealing the fact that that's why it's not working.
Yeah. Yeah. For sure. If you don't really believe in yourself and you're not willing to see yourself as a leader, as someone who can do that, and you're not willing to do the work of it, then it's going to be hard to do that. But
Yeah.
really, leadership is just built off influence. Like if you build influence with people, and I define influence as kind of the respect and relationship you have with other people that causes them to act with and for you. So part of my problem when I was younger was I didn't focus on building those relationships with people. I didn't build that influence. But if you build influence with people, if people trust you, if you build that respect, if you help people get wins and things of that nature, and you build that influence, then you don't have to have a position. You
Mhm.
just, people follow you just because of that relationship and respect they have with you.
Yeah, I think a lot of times people think they just like sometimes in a family, like you could have like your father, right? Your father is like naturally could be the leader in your family, but if he's doing things that are kind of don't make a lot of sense, like he's showing the wrong example. Like your father is like driving drunk, and he's kind of
Right.
telling you you shouldn't drink alcohol, but then he does it. It's kind of hard to respect that position, even though it's like, well, I'm your father. You should do what I tell you. Well, if you see him kind of failing, you're
Hmm.
not going to really start to believe anything he's telling you, because like it seems to be in opposition to what is actually really the right thing to do.
Oh yeah. I mean, it's you definitely have to always model what you say. If not, then you lose trust and you're seen as a hypocrite and you hurt that influence. I mean, of course it's it's like you saying with the drinking, even just parents like, hey, I'm speeding like crazy, but kids don't speed. Kids, they're not going to believe anything you say. They're going to keep speeding. And
Yeah,
if you're a leader in a company and you say, hey, these are our values, follow them, but then you don't follow them yourself, those val I mean, nobody's going to take anything what you say as real or worth much because you don't live what you say. So absolutely, I think
you got to
being a
walk
person
the
of
walk.
integrity and trust, for sure.
It's kind of like to walk the walk, like
Yeah.
because people talk, to talk, but they don't walk the walk. It's like it's kind of old school, but leadership and management. I mean, I've worked for a lot of Fortune 500 companies, and they've actually been in organizations where the leaders made like significant errors,
Hmm.
and never really acknowledged they made the errors, and just kind of just quietly walked away, or were moved out. And it just
Right.
seems like, okay, like leadership to me is like actually taking like the high road, and
Right.
actually explaining to the workers or to the staff is like, what is it we're trying to do, and like treating you with like that you deserve to know. Versus
Yeah.
just managing something. And then maybe you can talk the differences between like leadership and management.
Sure. Absolutely. So leadership and this leadership and management, that's one of the things I think is often really confused today because you'll see a lot of different definitions. You'll see different definitions of leadership, you'll see different definitions of management, and even books. A lot of times it seems like people have a hard time explaining it. But I think the best book I've seen was Julie Zhao's book, and it's called The Making of a Manager. And in it, this is her explanation between the two, and I think it's a really good one. And in it, she says, kind of the paraphrase, that leadership is a skill and management is a position. You don't have to have a position to lead, but you can't be a good manager without also being a good leader. And I
Mhm.
find that a really good explanation because management is a position. It's not, I mean, there's certain functions you have to do. That's part of the position. And you have to learn the skills in those things, but it's not like you learn some skill and poof, you're suddenly a manager. No, you have to be placed there. But leadership, like we said, is just built off influence. And if you build that influence with people, you don't have to have a position. And it's a skill, which that's a really cool thing, because that's why anybody can be a leader, because you build that influence and then you learn what it takes to be a good leader. You build those skills, you do those behaviors, and then you'll be a good leader if you do those follow those principles. But you can also, because sometimes people see leadership as at the top and then management's everything else. But even in the lowest management position, you still are leading people somewhere. You're still
Yeah.
taking people toward the goal, and you still are working with people. So you have to be able to lead people. And if you miss that part, then you aren't going to do well as a leader. And that's really why we have a lot of bad bosses, is because many people don't realize that they don't realize what leadership is, the importance of leadership, and that people in management positions need leadership skills.
Also, like in terms of leadership in the management world, like if you're in a shop or an organization, and the management treats the workers like they're replaceable, they're just
Mhm.
widgets, and there's no like respect for their craft, or whether they can just easily be replaced, then it's hard. The manager or the leader might not, they say something and the people are like, well, I don't really matter that
Right.
much, so like why am I going to listen, right?
Yeah.
So you might be in that position, but if you've got a disconnect because you don't make the workers feel valued, then
Mhm.
they're not going to necessarily value what you say.
Absolutely. Yeah. If you don't care about people, then you're not going to lead well, period. I mean, you can't, because like you said, if you know somebody doesn't care about you, you're not going to respect them. If you know they don't listen to you, then it hurts your influence so much. There's no way you can really lead well without building relationship and caring with people. And I,
Because
I
they'll get
totally
the
agree.
difference between a worker that feels like the leader is actually aligned to their point of view. So if you're in a
Right.
company that's like a startup and everybody's real passionate, people are working crazy hours not because you told them to, because they believe in what they're doing, right?
Right.
They feel they're going to reach the finish line. So they're putting in the wow hours. They're not asking for the overtime. They're not asking for, they're all working towards something because they believe they have this like leader that's visionary. And the visionary
Right.
leader is making them feel like, yeah, if I put this in, we're going to get this together, versus like this kind of top down, do it because I told you to do it. Not because you believed that you should do it, but I just tell you that's what you should do, and that there's no real connection to anything other than that's an edict from on high to tell you to do it.
Yeah. I think a great example I read it in Charles Duhigg's book, Smarter, Faster, Better. And I think I've read other stories about it, was when Toyota took over the first, or they took their first plant in the US in the early 80s, and it was an old GM plant. And that GM plant was one of the worst, period. And so they shut it down. And when Toyota came to take it over, and I'm not sure how all the agreements worked, but they had to keep 80% of the old workforce. And before at the place, they were like, I mean, there was drugs on the place. I mean, there's a lot of bad things going on at the place. I mean, it was low morale. The mentality was you just make the car happen, period. We don't listen to anything you say. But Toyota came in, and of course, they have the end-on cord that if there's a mistake, you pull the cord, which stops the line so that the mistake can be fixed. And that's a lot
Mhm.
of power for that individual worker, because it's thousands of dollars that they lose. But they said, we trust you for that. But they also had a policy where every single suggestion, every single complaint, like you turn it in, they're either going to implement it, or they're going to give you a written response why they can't do it.
Mhm.
And it turned that, like in 2 years, that factory was like one of the best producing, everything, just because the leadership changed how they treated people and how they listened to people.
It's a
Just
different
this the
mindset
change of
because
leadership.
I worked in Japan for 2 years, and it's like they had this zero defect mentality, and I was working in software. And the
Okay.
difference was like in this point of view, like we were doing financial transactions for like an insurance company within the Japanese market. And American market, I was working with a group of Americans that were in the American division of the company, and we were implementing a Japanese division. The Japanese division had a different point of view on defects. in terms of like a zero defect mentality. Like, so any defect, like a level 10 defect, has just as much a priority as a level one,
Oh,
10
wow.
being the lowest level. The Americans looked at that and said, no, 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 no. You got to say the tens, you don't have to really do those. And the Japanese, management, they were like, no, we have to treat all these defects at the same level. We have to treat them with the respect that we're going to solve them all, right?
Hmm.
And Americans couldn't get it. And when the Japanese showed them the issue is like if we make a mistake on a statement and it goes out to the public, we will actually have our executive go set up a convention hall and have the actual customers come, and we will bow and apologize to the customers for the mistake we made.
Wow.
We actually invite them, and the Americans were like, "What?" They couldn't get it, and they didn't understand that in that market, that's what that's the relationship with the client and the customer. The respect for like making mistakes was that you've got it's a they had this different mindset, and it really was a problem for some of the American management because they couldn't get a hold of it of why that was necessary. But they were in a different market. It was Tokyo. It wasn't Connecticut.
Yeah, I think that mentality makes a big difference. If we had really kind of in America that more of that customer mentality, then people would see business in a whole different light than they do right now. Because there's such a negative view about business. And that's because a lot of business leadership, they put, in a sense, profit over people. And while it may seem to help them temporarily, in the long term, it hurts you. And I love that example because when you treat customers that way, you build that loyalty, you build that influence. And of course, you can, speaking of, you become a leader in that industry and leader of people in that. So that's really cool. I like that.
Yeah, I just think it's important to have this idea about quality. A lot of times, like when I've worked on projects, quality is like, oh, that's where we can cut the timeline down on the project. The quality
Hmm.
assurance part of the project, the problem with the American mindset, like you're saying, is when it comes to doing the quality assurance test, if we said it takes 2 months to do it, but then the project starts slipping, where they pull the 2 months out, they pull a month out of our quality section. They pull
Yeah.
and they don't ask us whether or not that's the right thing to do. They just tell us that's how they're going to save the money. And
Right.
in being a worker, you're like, that's not the right way to do it. But
Right.
you're running by management by deadline. You're running management by budget, and that's where I think kind of Western or at least American mentality makes mistakes because they're so short term. They're so
Right.
into the profit margins. They're so into
Yeah.
the bean counting. They've
Hmm.
lost like some of the aesthetic of like, would you really want to be on the receiving end of that product where you cut the month out?
Yeah. Yeah. When you start, like I said, like you're saying, when you start treating that profit, that short term over the long term, and like yeah, like today, the quarter's like everything. Like you got to show, and so people will lay off people. People will, they'll do whatever tricks, they'll cut quality, cut whatever, just to show profit for the quarter. But then it can easily hurt you long term. And you lose loyalty with customers, like you're saying. When you don't put customers first, then you may make some extra money now, but in the long term, it hurts you. And that's also why, again, we have all that distrust in businesses today, and we have this distrust with business leaders. We have distrust. That's why there's honestly with the leadership in many companies why there's low engagement with employees. This is because they put that mentality of short term first versus long term. And when
Yeah,
we can change that, that's going to make a big difference in everything.
I think exceptionalism needs to go back, to where like if you have the pride in the product, it's kind of like
Right.
if you look at Boeing, if when you have engineers in charge, engineers will tend to say like, I want it to be close to that zero defect as possible, especially if you're an aircraft engineer.
Hmm.
But you run an accountant who has a different mindset or an actuarial person. They tend to
Right.
look at the numbers. right? And they
Yeah.
don't have the same mindset as an aeronautical engineer, mechanical engineer. Mechanical engineer is like, I'm looking at faults, I'm looking at
Mhm.
stress, I'm looking at failure rates. That's important to me as an
Right.
engineer. You're looking at, you know, economic values versus
Mhm.
like I'm looking at safety values. Is the plane going to stay in the sky? Is it going to
Little
stay?
important.
Yeah, I think that's important to me. Like, isn't that important to you? It's like, so it's like you have to, like, the exceptionalism is not just about the financial exceptionalism, which has,
Right.
like, I think is taken over corporate America to
Right.
where, in terms of like, what about product exceptionalism?
Mhm.
You have designed, yeah, anybody who has a like a refrigerator or dryer or washing machine. When I was a kid, those things lasted like 10 years,
Yeah.
20 years. Now they
Yeah.
barely make 5 years. You're like, well, what's up with
Yeah.
that?
Yeah. And yeah, I think Simon Sinek talks about it well. In his book, he has called book called The Infinite Game. And he talks about there's two different games that we play, the finite and the infinite. And the finite is like soccer or chess or things of that nature. There's set players, there's an ending, there's a start, there's a way to win. And with an infinite game, there is no set players because people can come and go. There is no ending. It's about continuing. And the rules change over time. And what happens with business is that many of them see business as a finite game. They're trying to win it. But business really isn't a finite game, it's an infinite game.
It's long
And
term.
it's something that you're trying to get better and improve. Like if you say you're number one, like what does that even mean? Like most money, most customers, highest ratings, and for how long? Like you can't. Like I mean, you can make up something to show you're number one, easy.
Yeah.
But what does that really mean?
What's it really mean? Yeah.
Yeah, and so it's the point really is to keep in the game and keep getting better, not to just try to win for a quarter. And I think with that too is like Peter Drucker, his stuff with the Essential Drucker book's just amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. I've read
That he
those. Yeah.
talks about, yeah, he talks so much about everything's the customer. Like that is like your thing. Your job is to please the customer. And if you do that, then profit isn't like why you do your business. It's a validation that you're doing your job well. And I think that's a great mentality when it has to all of that. If you just see that, hey, if we're making profit, that means we're doing what we need to for our customers. If we're not, then that's probably a sign we're not doing what we need to for our customers. And yeah,
Sometimes, it's like if you think about it, like sometimes like having the lowest price isn't always the best thing. Because like if
right,
you were in a market, like I'm a musician, right? So the company Moog was known for handmade synthesizers built in the US in North Carolina. People would be willing to spend more money for a hand built, non mass produced instrument because of the
right,
quality or the personal nature of it.
right,
Now the company has actually sold off and now they're made in Taiwan. And what they failed to understand is the core Moog user, like me, a musician. We bought our Moogs because we loved the fact that they were made in the USA and they were handmade. Now they're
right,
being mass produced. We don't. There's tons of Moog people, customers there are kind of rejecting the fact that you're going to lower the price, but that wasn't the point. We didn't want a lower price Moog. We weren't
right,
buying it for a low price. We were buying it because it was hand built.
right.
And some people like they somehow didn't understand that. So now they've kind of gone down that road.
Yeah. Like people definitely buy for different reasons. Some people are very, and for sometimes for good reasons, very cost conscious, and they just go for the cheapest. But often when you do that, the value is low too. But people buy for different reasons, and often people do want to buy for value. And when you always cut that out, you definitely hurt yourself a lot, for sure.
Yeah, it's just the fact that you could want something that's a boutique, handmade, kind of customized thing versus
Yeah,
a mass produced thing. So the difference between like an Etsy, somebody that's an Etsy vendor that's making
Mhm.
handmade things versus somebody who goes buy something from Hallmark. You
Right.
know, it's like that's mass produced, but I'm going to Etsy because I want that personal nature. And you might say, well, I can produce this many, but
Mhm.
versus like quantity versus quality versus
Yeah.
niche. And I think it's like some people, there's this age of like AI and robotics and automation. If you think about it, like, would you want to get a hamburger from the AI robotic hamburger shop or from like a guy that's a local vendor, is like hand grinding the Angus beef or has like, you know, Tokyo cuts of beef or like it has like their own secret sauce? Or
Right.
are you drawn to like the fully automated AI restaurant? I would think a lot
Yeah.
of people want to go to the restaurant where the human beings actually have the secret sauce.
Right. Yeah, for sure. That people like the human touch. People like the local stuff. My One of the towns I lived in for a long time, we had one of those stores where a guy had it's kind of just a small restaurant, but he every day he went and got the meat from the butcher and he ground it. He made the burgers off it, and it was delicious. And it was very popular because of that. People love that kind of human touch with it.
So, I mean, in a world that's telling everybody that we need to go with the non-human touch, even to the point where executive decisions should be made by AI, right? That strategic decisions should be made by AI. Then you're starting
Wow.
to like I know the technologist, I'm a technologist, like to do things because they can.
Hmm.
My question is, should you do it? Just because you can do it doesn't mean that you should do it, right? The
Yeah.
technologist will make something without thinking about the moral implications, the legal
Hmm.
implications, the societal implications. So, like you build the atomic bomb as a scientist because you want to be able to prove that you can. Then after Oppenheimer starts thinking, oh, maybe I shouldn't have done that.
Right.
Just because I can doesn't mean that you should.
Yeah. And for sure. Like even with the AI thing, I mean, when it comes to decisions and even things like that, emotion has been shown to be part of our decision making. Like if you just make decisions based purely on logic, then it's been shown that you make worse decisions. So emotion is part of what we do when we make decisions. So AI is a tool. I think it's a good idea to use it if you can to help you see the
It's a
information you need
tool
to
set.
be able to
It's in the
make a
toolbox.
decision.
It's in the
Yeah,
toolbox, but not the whole. It's not the only tool in the toolbox.
right. And if you've watched movies like with Will Smith and stuff about AI, I don't know if you want them to make all your decisions. So.
No, it's like you still want human feedback in the loop. But I've heard
Mhm.
technologists saying, "Well, I can replace the CFO and the CEO with a full AI implementation," and
Yeah,
I'm like, I don't know if you really want to do that,
yeah.
because like you're totally misjudging, and you're saying, well, the human being can never take in all the inputs, and theoretically, the AI could take in so many inputs from so
Mhm,
many areas faster than a human being ever could. It could come up with a decision that maybe is
mhm.
more informed than the human being. But the human being should still be allowed to look at the result of that and
Right.
then measure it against their own judgment.
Yeah. And it's when you pull out like the people part of it, like you make decisions, but you can again make it all logically and all the facts, but then there's also the other layers of people layers. There's human layers, there's emotion layers, there's value layers. And all of that has to be put into the decision as well. And AI can look at some of it, but AI doesn't have emotion. AI doesn't have the experience and intuition. I mean, they have past things from other people, but it misses out on stuff to be a final decision maker.
Yeah, it
And
makes things called hallucinations, which are based
right.
on whatever the large learning library it learns on is based on whatever date it learned on. So if
Hmm.
you learned on to something like 2 years ago, and that database is based on learning library based on what happened 2 years ago, it's not based on what's happening now.
Right.
So it could actually make a decision, and it could give you a bad result. It's called hallucination by the AI. And if
Right.
you're not smart enough to recognize it, you could go with a bad decision. And that's where the human factor, like any machine. you always still have human beings, even in plants that have automation. You have people monitoring what it's doing.
Right.
You always have a human being taking the like, oh, I'm gonna take the rudder, I'm gonna make a course correction. You can't just give up the ship because like, oh, it seems like, oh, that's hip to give up give up the control.
Yeah. And if you think about if you have an AI that has no emotion, that's very impersonal, and it depends, like, and with that, you have, like, if you have that focus for profit focus first, that many have, because part of it's determined what their focus is, and that just makes that whole situation worse as a whole because
Yeah,
their
just
whole what it's
cascade.
aiming for is, yeah. So,
Exponential. Like it's exponential, and it's like it has bias. It's the
mhm,
bias of whatever it learned on. So for what it learned
yeah,
on is like it has an idea that this is the concept, but it learned on a concept that doesn't consider other things, right? So it
right,
doesn't consider like other factors because the person who gave it the information didn't look at those factors. So those
yeah,
factors aren't included in the actual matrix. And so there's a lot of people that's like is like we're not to the point where these things have any kind of human capability. But some people are thinking it actually does have human capability. And I think that's the kind of like blind alley. Like you
mhm,
really got to be careful because there are people already have in terms of like an example like LinkedIn and a lot of these like a lot of job search capabilities systems are using
mhm,
so much algorithmic AI. It's actually preventing people from actually getting interviews.
right,
They're not being able to talk to a human being. So they're not talking to a human recruiter because the AI is weeding them out before they
mhm,
even can talk to a human being. So people are not being able to even get to an HR person.
right,
And now that is a disaster in terms of how much human capability is being missed because you're looking for some criteria and you're not even having a human to human talk with that candidate.
yeah. It's with resumes can be kind of, or even the whole hiring process can be kind of, I won't say hard, wrong in some ways, because if your whole mentality is certain criteria, like you're saying, like, making sure they have certain experience, making sure they have whatever. I mean, everybody, I won't say everybody, so many people put on their resumes that they're hardworking, that they're great communicators, that, I mean, you can put those things on there, but it doesn't mean much.
Yeah.
And if you're focused on the wrong things overall, I mean, it can be a helpful tool to help sort things, I'm sure. But if your focus is on finding those specific things versus, like, if you're looking for a manager, you want to look for leadership skills. And just having been in a position doesn't mean they know how to lead, or just because, or you want someone who has good character, good soft skills in different areas. And sometimes resumes don't show that well. And if all you do is filter just for, experience, and are they experienced with this software or programming, whatever, then you can miss out on people for sure would be
Yeah.
qualified, you know?
I mean, I have had tons of jobs where I didn't have any experience in the particular thing, but
Mhm.
I had a relatable experience.
Right.
But because I didn't have the acronym, like I didn't have Salesforce or I didn't have Jira or I didn't have Java, but I've been in IT for 20 years and I have the ability to learn and I've learned in multiple industries, banking, insurance, property, other tech. Some of these systems today are so into that acronym that it
Mhm.
won't give you the opportunity to talk to somebody and actually somebody realize that this guy learns new things all the time. And because
Yeah.
he's got relatable experience, he could doesn't have this thing, but he could do it. He could learn it. He could probably get it and be valuable to you because these other things that you didn't ask for.
Right.
And that's where I think there's a big problem with people using tools to make decisions without including human beings. And so it's like this. Oh, I'm going to use this tech, and that puts me in a leadership role because I'm using the best tech. But like you're actually shooting yourself in the foot.
Right. Yeah. And that's speaking of leadership, that's one of the big things that really hurts us as leaders sometimes is when it comes to like hiring and things of that nature, is that they hire for those reasons, where that person was a good graphic designer. So let's move them to the manager of graphic designers. And that doesn't equate, because those are two different skills with two different functions. Now, someone could be a good leader, someone could manage well, and they could learn that.
Mhm.
But just because they were good, those two positions don't equal. And
Yeah,
so when people move them up, that's then, if
like
they're not
tenure.
trained.
Yeah, the tenure trap. Because a lot of people, they've been in a company like 10 years, 15 years, and they just start moving them. But
Mhm,
maybe, like you said, they would look at it, it's an architect. Like he's an architect level, then they throw him into the CFO role. Or
right.
throw him, but he's not really that guy, but he thinking because he was there, he's been in a room that, but he actually isn't the guy for that job. There's somebody else, maybe outside the company, that might be better. But because
Yeah,
you have this thing like, oh, it's tenure and he's been here and I've seen him and I know him, you're
yeah,
making some decisions that are not necessarily the right decision.
yeah. And like leadership is like so important, because it's the number one factor of success or failure for an organization or for a team. Like it's a determining factor. Like we kind of mentioned before, you can change the leader and get completely different results with the same teams. And because people don't understand leadership, because people don't understand its importance and how, and to make sure they need to train people and hire the right people, we get all these poor bosses and poor leaders in these positions. And then then they assume that they know how to lead because they're in the position, when they don't. Just like I thought I knew how to lead when I didn't. And
Mhm.
then you get people in CEOs positions who are raised for the wrong reasons. Maybe they were good at marketing, and they're like, well, we need more marketing, so let's get a marketing based CEO. Well, that doesn't mean they know how to lead. And so then that they may put a good show, they may make some money here and there, but long term, when it comes to culture, when it comes to all other important aspects of business in the long term, it ends up hurting. And then often these people, especially when you have charismatic leaders, and they may be, people may think you have to be charismatic to be a leader, but you don't,
Yeah.
because
It's the last
but you
show.
have these, yeah.
Last show,
But
no go.
often, mhm, but these people, like, they may do good while they're there, like, or may show good, or, may look good, but then they leave, and then everything falls apart. And it's because, and they think that it shows how good they were, when really it shows that they weren't good, because leaders who do well, they build a team of people who can function without them and who can
Yeah.
keep moving forward. And when it falls apart without you, that just means you didn't train people well.
Yeah, you put too
And
many decisions in a small group of people, and so like the leader who's transformational actually can transform the whole organization. So there's a multiple like multiple leaders under them because
yeah,
they were secure enough in themselves to let go the reins
hmm,
to give it to like the engineering department. If they have the right set of marching orders, they can be allowed to kind of go off on their own. The advertising department is allowed to kind of, as long as they have a vision. And then you
right,
have multiple people who have skill sets and multiple people being brought up. So it's not dependent on one
yeah,
person. And so you don't want to call it a personality running the show, because once they're gone, like you said, the whole thing falls apart because there's no legs to it. There's no infrastructure to it.
yeah. You want to set, no, you have the vision, you have the direction, you have your mission, your goals, and you set clear expectations. But then you have to release people to make decisions. You train them, you set the guidelines. But often what happens, and why, like in education, in nonprofits, and in any industry, one reason there's so demoralized people is you have these people at the top who, because they're in that position, they think they know the issue, or because they have an educational degree, they know what the issues are. So that, well, these problems are happening down here, so let me make all these policies to fix these problems. Versus, if nothing else, listening and talking to these people to see what the issues are, or saying, okay, you're the people closest to the problem, what's solve it,
Yeah,
or
yeah.
here's the guidelines, make the decisions you need to in your job to move things forward. Because I know, as someone calling customer service, there's one of the things, is nothing more frustrating than a customer service rep who has no power to do anything.
Yeah.
The best ones are when they have the power to, like, let me solve your problem, and they're empowered, here's you have the power to make these decisions in your job that relate to you. And the more you do that, the more you put decision making closest to the problem, the more satisfied customers are, especially with customer service. But the better the problems are solved versus this. Because when you're a leader at the top, you don't realize how detached you are from reality. And so when
Yeah.
you start pushing down policies, you end up hurting instead of helping, and it demoralizes and people don't feel listened to. But when you put decision making close to the problem, then that helps solve it. That helps things.
Yeah.
You're not a bottleneck. Decisions are
Yeah.
made better and faster.
Because you're gonna have a paralysis. Like if you got a bunch of engineers that know how to solve a problem, but they got to talk to the chief engineer for every decision. They can't
Right.
make a decision at the level they're at. So then you just get nothing but like a massive like delay. So
Mhm.
because all the decisions have to go for like a stamp of approval from this one guy, and then he gets too many things in the pipeline, and then the pipeline gets like shut down, and then things sneak through because like people start getting disengaged because like it takes so long to get anything done. So then they don't even mention what's wrong.
Yeah.
So so then you just get like the quality starts to just precipitously drop because it's not
Mhm.
being reactive to what's going on. If you let the people on the floor say, "Hey, we could fix this,"
Yeah.
but
And you have to set,
can't do
you
it.
set as a leader, you set clear guidelines and expectate this is the direction we're going. Here's the guidelines for our decisions. But you have to let them make it. Like you said, you become a bottleneck if not, and that's how a lot of leaders, in a sense, become burned out and frustrated because they feel like, or sometimes people feel like leadership is making decisions. That's how they define it, and so they feel like they're supposed to be decisive and make all the decisions. But then you just hurt yourself, like you said, because you become that bottleneck and you demoralize the people below you. And you have to let go and release. The uh, Ken Blanchard, he had a book called he does the 1 Minute Manager type books, but he had one called the 1 Minute Manager and the Monkey. And he says what often that many leaders do is, and it's a similar thing, is like when people come to them with a problem, they take the monkey from them and put it on themselves, which means
Yeah.
they take the next step for the problem or next step for the issue. So when it comes to all the decisions, they put that on them. If there's a problem, instead of just guiding them on how to solve the problem or giving them directions, asking questions, like, well, I'll take the next step for it. And so ended up all their employees can go home and enjoy their lives while they're stuck in the office extra hours because they have all those monkeys they have to solve versus helping their team be able to solve the problems and letting their team make the decisions and things of that nature. And it hurts them. That's how a lot of managers get burned out and things of that nature.
Yeah, it's like the micromanager that everybody hates because they just get into every day-to-day decision and they feel like I can't feel like I have any ownership, right?
Right.
And like you said, if you feel like you actually are can make critical decisions and not be hindered by like an overly elaborate bureaucracy. You have to have like change control procedures. I understand that. You have
Right.
budget control procedures because you don't want to blow the budget, but you have to be reasonable in terms of
Mhm.
what actually dictates like a full change control that's going to cost like millions of dollars versus something that actually would be better suited to have like other people take the ball. Because not
Mhm.
everybody like you can't take the ball the whole time unless you wanted like
Right.
you're gonna run that like you're the only guy running the ball to the net every play. You're the only one. Like that's nobody's even gonna want to watch that.
Right. Yeah. For sure. It's definitely important to do that. Like, you have to have, like you said, you have those guidelines and expectations and you train. But when you have a purpose and clear mission that you're going, that people can drive toward, when you empower them to make those decisions, it builds ownership. And ownership's really what you want. When you're micromanaging, controlling, that just hurts you. But when you give people ownership, then you're not having to try to make people comply. They're doing it because they want to. And that's really what you want to build, of course, in your employees.
I'm wondering, like and we have a lot of leaders. And I don't want to jump into politics, but part of the problem, like in our politics today, is like if you look at the age of our leaders. And I don't want to be an ageist,
Mm,
but there's a lot of people that get to stay in a position so long that they get out of touch,
Mhm.
right? And we don't have enough like transfer of knowledge or experience. We've got people that stay in roles for like 30 years, 40
Yeah.
years. And then it's like, we'll wonder why things are broken because they're just staying in there for their own interest.
Mhm. And that's really just in broad sense, that's one of the biggest, I think, confusions about leadership, or one of the biggest misconceptions, is that people see leadership as about them versus serving. And sometimes people say, "Oh, service leadership or servant leadership, that's a style or that's whatever." But it's not. It's not something you choose, it's what you do. Because leadership, as kind of the best definition I have of leadership, is that it's the process of guiding people toward the accomplishment of a goal through influence. So you build that influence with people, and you're taking people somewhere. And when it says guiding, you're not forcing or coercing. You're not using a taser, because that's not guiding. That's not leading. You're leading people through influence. And what often happens is people don't see leadership as that way. They see it as, when they get into a position, it's about them. It's the rewards, the perks, the career, or whatever it may be. And it's not about serving the people to accomplish the mission, it's about serving themselves. And
Mhm.
so that happens in corporations, that happens in management, that happens with government. And that's one of the big things, is they don't see it as, if our government leaders mentality was, I'm here to serve the people that I'm called to serve, versus my party, versus my personal interest, or whatever it
Mhm.
may be, then we'll be getting completely different results.
Yeah,
But some
you'd have
people
more
have that.
responsive. Well, the
Yeah.
thing is, like, at some points, you need to let go. Like at some point, like if you're just doing it for yourself, you're not doing it for the mission for the people. So
Right.
like if you're just, it seems like at some point you have to realize, well, maybe I need to give up the reins to another group of people, or maybe I need to jump to something else because like I think eventually you're phoning it in, or you're not being as vital, you're not really adding value. Like if you can be honest as a leader and say, am I really adding value anymore? Do I need
Yeah.
to actually give this up and move on and give somebody else? But is there really incentive in leadership to do that?
Incentive, I guess it depends on your mentality, because if you're really about serving and really have the right mentality, even as a company, if you get to the point you realize that maybe you aren't the best for that position anymore, then if you're really about doing what's right, then you're going to step aside
Step
and let
aside, yeah.
somebody else,
You don't need an
like,
incentive. They would know to do it without an incentive.
right. Yeah, I don't know how to put that, like, just in general, the incentive for that, but it's, yeah,
It's kind of like
but
you
yeah,
don't need an incentive. You kind of got to know. But then there's a
yeah,
guideline. It's like, well, how do people know? Well, I guess it's in
yeah.
yourself. You have to know.
Yeah, I guess, there's a book called The Founder's Dilemma that kind of talks about that. Is like, a lot of times people start a business or company, and they're really excited about it. They love it, but their company grows, and their level of ability and leadership and management
Beyond that, right?
doesn't fit with it. And so if you really want your company to grow, it may be your company, you may love it, but you may have to step aside so that it can keep growing, getting better. So then it really becomes a choice of, and that's why it's good in the sense of, I guess, things to show you win, is if you have a good board, good counselors, good people around you that are willing to be honest with you, like, hey, I think it's time for you to step aside and take a different position, so that we can put somebody else in who's
Mhm.
can be for the next stage, you know. Something like that maybe would
Yeah,
be
so
the
it's kind of
way.
like organizational awareness to
Mhm.
know when those moments are happening and actually
Right.
make those decisions and to be transparent enough to do it at the right time.
Yeah. And I think it's easy, speaking, talking about not really understanding what's happening, is it's easy, especially as any leader, especially as you get higher up, CEO, is that, again, you get detached and you don't realize it. And I remember one story of this lady, she wasn't getting whatever results she wanted. And then she realized, she was a CEO, and she realized, I hadn't talked to a customer for like 2 years.
Wow.
And so she's like, well, I need to actually go out there and actually talk to people again, so I can really understand what's going on. And sometimes we can, as leaders, that get into our bubbles on top and think we know when we don't realize we haven't talked to
Yeah,
people
you're
at all.
disconnected. Yeah,
Disconnected.
you get so high up on the tower that you don't
Hmm.
know what's going on at the foundation, and so
Right.
it's like you have to step out and make that assessment. Sometimes you're like there might be not be an incentive to do that because like the incentive is to kind of just stay in your tower
Yeah.
because like you didn't you're kind of isolated and you feel comfortable. But it's like if you get any kind of comfort is kind of dangerous to me. Like I think you have to put yourself in this kind of situation where you might be treading a little water to uh
Hmm.
to know that you can't just your comfort could be very destructive. That sometimes you need to be a little uncomfortable.
Yeah, for sure. And it actually, all this makes me think of Good to Great by Jim Collins. And he talked about that he found that the leaders of the greatest companies were humble and driven. And he said that they were driven because they were about their purpose and that to make it happen. But they were humble because if they got credit, they would pass it on to others. But more than that, they were okay with people not even knowing it was them that made the
Mhm.
business successful because it wasn't about them. And he called those like level 5 leaders to getting to that point. And I think that's one reason why it's so important in organizations, society, when it comes to leadership, that we make sure we understand what leadership is, that we make sure when we're putting people in these positions, and that's one reason we get these people who are detached sometimes. Sometimes, I mean, you may be put in a position and you get detached just because it happens. And you just have to be careful about that. But sometimes it's because we keep raising up leaders who don't know leadership. And then the board hires a CEO who is not really a good leader, but they're a good salesperson or whatever it
Mhm.
may be. And then we're just shooting ourselves in the foot basically from the get go, is that we're putting the wrong positions in, and then we're not training people on really how to be great leaders. So we're stuck with those situations.
Yeah, it was just you wonder like business school. If you look at the business schools and you look at the MBA programs and you look at the structures it's designed to create the leaders. So what's your opinion on the infrastructure of the systems that create like these templates? Um, or is there concern that they're not actually robust enough for what we're dealing with today?
I'm I'm not I don't know that much about all the MBA programs. I know from what I've seen, just in general, of some of the things of even educational leadership and things of that nature, is leadership itself and how to lead. That aspect is often not taught well, because if it was, we'd have a lot better leaders.
Mhm.
And I find what's often taught is, well, let's talk about theories of leadership, or the conventional wisdom, which conventional wisdom just in general is often wrong, whether it's for both social media or whatever. It's generally wrong. And so often what's taught that I've seen, I don't know all the programs.
Mm.
I see the results, and I've seen a few of the things, like in some categories, that they don't really teach, okay, this is what leadership is. This is how you lead. This is why it's important, you know, because if we did, then again, we'd have a lot better leaders out there.
Yeah,
But, you know,
I think the problem is they get into like economic theory, management theories. It's all like theory.
right.
And then if you actually see, there's a lot of people who actually didn't even go through that. There's a lot of people that are like self-made creators or people who just found themselves in that position because they had this kind of drive and
Yeah.
they got to it because they kind of had, I don't know, a vision. And that vision didn't
Mhm.
necessarily match the theory. It
Yeah.
probably was like maybe antithetical to the theory.
Yeah, if you look, if you, when it comes to leadership, if you look at all the different books, like you have John Maxwell, and you have Simon Sinek, you have Jocko Willink, and when you read their books, there's others too, Abernath, who was Abershoff and Marquet, who were captains in the U.S. Navy, who completely turned their ships around with the different leadership and writ books about it. And when you read those things, none of them talks about, I followed this theory about leadership. You know, they talked about all of them. Like they don't talk about theories. They don't talk about what leadership style they are, whatever it is. They talk about principles that they followed to be a good leader.
Mhm.
And if we started focusing more on those principles, if we took from that and put that in our schooling about in educational leadership and MBAs and everything, and just talked about these are the principles, not the theories that whatever. These are the principles that have been shown that make a good leader. That this is how you lead. And again, leadership is just a skill and it's a set of behaviors that you do. And this is the things that good leaders do. And if you want to be a good leader, you have the right mentality of service first, and not about you, it's about service. And when you have that mentality, you take ownership. You communicate well. You empower people to make decisions, and you're about helping, not hurting. All those things that are important to leadership. And if we did that, then we'd be getting a lot better leaders out there.
Yeah, because I think sometimes it's like all the acronyms and licenses and certifications don't necessarily mean that the person has the people skills, the vision, the communication skills, because it's a different type of person that can pass a test, right? The
Hmm.
the test that says they can do it, right?
Yeah.
Versus actually really living it and doing it. Because some
Hmm.
people are really trained to the test. So they can
Yeah.
get the I've run into many, many people with the acronyms in my Fortune 500 world,
Right.
and they have been like one of the worst managers I've ever dealt with,
Yeah.
right? Versus people that never even had any of the acronyms and had a
Right.
way better style. So all that
Yeah.
taught me was they know how to pass the test to get the
Right.
acronym. Doesn't mean they actually know how to do it.
Yeah. And then it becomes worse is that they think because they have the acronyms, because they have the degrees, they think they know how to lead when they don't. And then it becomes harder because of that too, because
Yeah,
they
it's a
assume they do.
self-fulfilling thing because like the way the world is, they measure you for the role based on all those acronyms.
Right.
And they never
Yeah.
did they ever go back and talk to the workers,
Right.
talk to the people they led rather
Hmm.
than, 'cause when you measure a teacher, right? If there's 5% of the class is getting A's and the rest of the class is getting D's, right? That means the teacher's failing,
Right.
right? But a lot of times they don't measure the teacher that way. And I think they need to measure the business leaders that way too, but they don't.
Yeah.
And I think that's a
Yeah.
mistake.
Yeah. I remember one organization I worked for, they they would be hiring a people for new management positions. And so the only person they would talk to would be like the supervisor over them. They wouldn't talk to the people who were under them. They wouldn't talk to the people around them. They would just talk to the supervisor. But people often act different with the supervisor versus those
Yeah,
around them. And,
it
so
doesn't equate. It's like you're measuring things the wrong way.
yeah.
But, and I think that and then you keep on getting the same people and you're like, why are we getting the same results? Like, well, what's the definition of insanity? It's like why it's like there's something you can learn. It's like start to use your critical thinking. You're always a lot of
Yeah.
these people are always talking about critical thinking. But when it comes to measuring their own behavior and their own results, where's the critical thinking in that?
Right. Absolutely. For
But
sure.
I love talking to you today because we brought up a lot of cool things that maybe we don't always talk about on the show. But if people go to your exceptionalskills.com, what do they find there?
It's just that's my site. I have a bunch of articles about a lot of different topics from leadership and also from different topics. That particular link is just to my book. If you want to check out my book, it's 65 lessons every leader needs to know, just simple lessons. But there's also just there's different resources, and then like my YouTube, I have a bunch of videos that you can get off from my site just on leadership. So if you really just want to learn more about leadership and grow in that, or even some other skills, I just have those resources on my site.
Well, I think it's great to talk about it because I think people, never really dive into leadership in the way that we've talked to in the last hour. And
Right.
there's probably a lot of assumptions, a lot of preconceived ideas, but it's good to actually have an open discussion and challenge like your belief system on it. And check
Absolutely.
out like your view and to just open the door to like, wow, think about it. And
Yeah.
that's why we like to talk to people on the show. So hope everybody was thinking about your idea of a leadership and dive into your vision for it. And I appreciate you being a guest here on the weekend. on Family
I
Life Equals
appreciate
Life.
you having me. Thank you so much.
Have a great day.
Sure. You too.